Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going deep on some pretty fascinating ideas from Morgan Housel's book, Same as Ever: A Guide to What Never
Oh
Changes.
yeah, a great book.
Yeah, and we're really, our goal, our mission here is to kind of uncover these like timeless truths about risk success and these patterns in human behavior that just seem to repeat themselves over and over throughout history.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about how even as the world changes so dramatically, like these core patterns just keep popping up.
Yeah, it's like this tapestry of human experience, and you see these threads just kind of weaving their way through different contexts across time.
Exactly.
And one of the things that really grabbed my attention early on in the book was this story Housel tells about Warren Buffett.
Oh yeah.
He poses this question like, do you remember what the best-selling candy bar was in 1962?
Oh wow.
You know who thinks about that?
I have no idea.
Right, it was a Snickers.
Oh okay.
And his point is that even in a year like 1962, with the Cuban Missile Crisis and the world's on edge,
Right.
these simple joys and these constants of life, like a Snickers bar, they still hold their place.
Yeah.
But it goes deeper than that.
Yeah.
He's highlighting this powerful concept of compounding.
Right.
These tiny changes that accumulate over time and can lead to these huge results. Like,
Yeah.
he uses the example of evolution.
Right.
These small genetic mutations over millions of years have created this incredible diversity of life.
It's just mind-blowing when you think about it that way.
Yeah, it really is. And that principle applies to so many areas of life, not just biology, like investing.
Oh sure.
A mediocre investor who just consistently puts money in the market, even if it's small amounts and earns decent returns over decades, can end up wealthier than someone who's trying to time the market or chase those flashy short-term gains.
Absolutely. It's about consistency in the long run.
Yeah, so what's one thing that you could start doing today, even if it's something small,
Yeah.
that could have a huge impact on your life 5 or 10 years down the line?
That's a good question.
It could be anything from reading more or learning a new skill or even just like dedicating a few minutes each day to mindfulness.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that.
So Housel takes this idea of compounding and then applies it to risk,
Okay.
but in a slightly different way.
Okay.
He points out that, the biggest risks are often the ones that we don't see coming, these unforeseen events that catch us off guard.
Yeah. Like black swan events or things like that.
Exactly. And he uses some pretty stark examples like COVID-19, 9/11, Pearl Harbor, the Great Depression.
Right. Yeah.
All these events that just shook the world and very few people saw them coming.
Yeah, it's a little unsettling.
It is. And he argues that, there isn't necessarily more or less uncertainty in the world at any given time.
Okay.
What changes is our awareness of the potential risks. And there's this great quote that he shares by Carl Richards. He says, "Risk is what's left over after you think you've thought of everything."
Wow. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, and he tells this fascinating story about Houdini,
Oh, really?
the famous escape artist.
Yeah, yeah.
And Houdini, he would invite the strongest man in the audience to punch him in the stomach as hard as they could.
As part of his act.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he was convinced that he could withstand any blow because he was prepared for it. He knew what to expect.
Right.
But then after one show, this student approached him backstage and punched him in the stomach without any warning.
Oh, no.
And Houdini wasn't braced for it. He wasn't flexing or holding his breath like he normally would during his act.
Right?
And tragically, that unexpected punch is believed to have ruptured his appendix,
Oh, wow.
leading to his death a few days later.
That's a crazy story.
It is. And it's, it's a stark reminder that what you don't see coming can be the most dangerous.
Right.
So how do we deal with this reality that we can never truly predict or prepare for every possible risk?
Right.
I think it comes down to having a mindset that's adaptable and resilient.
Okay.
It's not about eliminating risk entirely,
Right.
but being able to navigate it effectively when it inevitably arises.
Yeah, that makes sense. Would you agree with that?
I would, and it's interesting how Housel then connects this idea of risk and uncertainty to our expectations.
Okay.
He uses the example of the nostalgia for the 1950s. You
Right.
hear people talk about how things were simpler, better back then.
Yeah.
But when you look at the data, life is objectively better now in many ways.
Yeah.
Homes are larger, food is more affordable, incomes are higher.
Right.
Yet this nostalgia for the 1950s persists.
Why do you think that is?
Is it just selective memory or is there something deeper at play?
It's a good question.
Housel suggests that envy plays a big role.
Okay.
We're constantly comparing ourselves to others, to images we see in the media, to this idealized version of the past. Right?
And this leads to dissatisfaction even when our own lives are improving.
Yeah, I can see that.
And he quotes Charlie Munger, who said that the world isn't driven by greed, but by envy. We're always looking at what others have, what we perceive to be lacking in our own lives.
Yeah.
And and this ties into another point that Housel makes about managing expectations.
Okay.
He uses Will Smith's observation about fame.
Okay.
Becoming famous is amazing. Being famous is a mixed bag. Losing fame is miserable.
Wow.
And it all boils down to expectations.
Yeah.
When we achieve something we've always wanted, it's exhilarating.
Right.
But then the pressure mounts to maintain that level of success.
Yeah.
And if we fall short, it can be crushing.
Right.
So it makes you think, how can we appreciate what we have while still striving for more without getting caught in that trap of constantly escalating expectation?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
It is. And Housel argues that part of the answer lies in understanding the nature of unique minds.
He says that people who achieve extraordinary things often think and behave differently.
Interesting.
He tells this great anecdote about Eliud Kipchoge, considered by many to be the greatest marathon runner of all time.
Oh, yeah?
And during the 2021 Olympics, while other runners were in the staging room scrolling through their phones, Kipchoge was sitting quietly staring at the wall,
Really?
seemingly content in the stillness.
Wow.
It's a glimpse into how differently his mind works.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
It highlights that the very traits that contribute to someone's success can also make them seem unconventional or even difficult at times.
Right, like they come as a package deal.
Yeah, and he shares other examples like John Boyd, the brilliant but notoriously difficult fighter pilot who revolutionized aerial combat,
Oh, yeah?
and Isaac Newton, the genius who also dabbled in alchemy.
Right.
These were individuals who pushed boundaries, challenged conventions, and in doing so, achieved incredible things.
It makes you wonder, are those extraordinary achievements inseparable from the personality quirks?
Yeah, is it all part of the same package?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating question, and it reminds me of another point that Housel makes about the power of story.
Okay.
He argues that people remember stories more than facts,
Right.
and that the best story often wins, regardless of the underlying truth.
Interesting.
He uses the example of Yuval Noah Harari and his book Sapiens.
Oh, yeah, great book.
And Harari himself has said that the book didn't present any original research.
Right.
It was so well written, so engaging,
It's a great story.
that it became this global phenomenon.
Yeah, it's true.
Another great example is Ken Burns' documentary, The Civil War.
Oh, yeah.
Burns meticulously matches his script to music,
Right.
creating this emotionally resonant experience that draws viewers in and stays with them long after the credits roll.
Powerful stuff.
It is, and it makes you think about the power of storytelling in your own life. How
Yeah.
can you use stories to communicate your ideas more effectively, to connect with others on a deeper level?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So Housel then pivots to this surprising observation. The 1930s, while economically devastating, was also the most productive decade in U.S. history.
Wow. That's interesting. Talk about a paradox.
How do you make sense of that?
I don't know. What do you think?
Well, Housel argues that adversity often forces innovation.
Nope.
The need to solve problems, to overcome challenges, can spark creativity and drive progress.
Right.
Think about it, the rise of major infrastructure projects, the electrification of rural America, the push for greater efficiency in factories.
Yeah.
All these advancements happened during a time of immense hardship.
That's true.
It's a powerful reminder that even in the face of difficulties, we can find ways to adapt, to innovate, to create a better future.
Absolutely. It challenges our assumptions about what conditions are necessary for progress and growth.
Yeah, and maybe a little bit of discomfort can actually be a catalyst for positive change.
Maybe so.
And that brings us to another intriguing concept. This difference between overnight tragedies and long-term miracles. Housel starts by sharing the story of President Eisenhower's heart attack in 1955.
Oh, wow.
At the time, heart disease was the leading cause of death in the U.S.
Right.
But since then, we've seen a remarkable decline in heart disease death rates.
Really?
Over 70%, in fact.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's a public health triumph.
Yeah.
But because this progress happened gradually over decades, most people haven't even noticed.
That's true. We don't always see the slow, gradual changes.
It's a reminder that we tend to focus on those dramatic, immediate events, while those slow, incremental changes often go unnoticed, even though they might be more impactful in the long run.
Right. So what are some examples of seemingly small trends happening today that could lead to huge changes in the future?
That's a great question to ponder.
It is.
And it underscores the importance of having a long-term perspective.
Absolutely. And, speaking of that long-term perspective, it reminds me of this concept that Housel touches on called rational optimism.
Oh, I love that term. It's about having hope for the future without ignoring the realities of the present, right?
Exactly. And believing that things will ultimately get better, but acknowledging that there will be setbacks along the way.
Okay. Yeah.
He uses the example of James Stockdale,
Oh, yeah.
a prisoner of war in Vietnam who endured years of torture.
Right.
And Stockdale observed that the prisoners who clung to this belief that they would be released by a certain date, Christmas, then Easter, and so on,
Right.
those were the ones who often didn't survive.
Yeah. It makes sense. If you're constantly expecting this quick resolution that doesn't come, it can be devastating.
Yeah, and Stockdale, on the other hand, maintained this belief that he would eventually be freed, but also accepted the reality of his situation.
Okay.
He prepared himself mentally and emotionally for a long and difficult ordeal.
Right.
And, another example that Housel highlights is Bill Gates' insistence on having a 12-month cash reserve for Microsoft,
Oh, wow.
even when they were wildly successful.
That's fascinating. It seems counterintuitive. Why would a company at the top of its game need such a huge safety net?
It really speaks to this balance of optimism and realism that Housel's talking about.
Yeah.
Gates was confident in Microsoft's future, but also understood that unexpected events could happen. And so he prepared for those possibilities.
It's like that saying, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst.
Exactly.
Seems like a wise approach, not just for business, but for life in general.
I think so too. And this kind of leads us to another really thought-provoking concept that Housel introduces this idea of stabilizing instability.
Okay, that sounds counterintuitive. So how can stability lead to instability?
Well, he draws on Hyman Minsky's financial instability hypothesis.
Okay.
And Minsky argued that prolonged periods of economic stability can actually lead to complacency, excessive risk-taking, and eventually a greater likelihood of a crisis.
So when things are going well, we tend to let our guard down.
Right.
And that's when we become most vulnerable.
Exactly. And Housel uses these real-world examples, like overconfidence in markets, leading to bubbles, complacency about pandemics, leading to unpreparedness.
Right.
Even something like record rainfall can ultimately lead to devastating fires, as we've seen in recent years.
So it's almost like those very things that make us feel secure can, in a roundabout way, set the stage for future problems.
Yeah, and Housel connects this to the Red Queen hypothesis,
Oh, yeah.
which states that we need to constantly adapt and improve just to stay in the same place.
I remember that from Alice in Wonderland. She finds herself in this strange world where she has to keep running just to stay in the same spot.
Exactly.
It's a great metaphor for the competitive nature of life.
It is. We can't become complacent.
Yeah.
We have to constantly learn, grow, and evolve to stay ahead of the curve.
So Housel then tells this chilling story about the Donner Party,
Oh, gosh.
this group of pioneers who set out for California in the 1840s.
Yeah.
And tempted by the promise of a faster route, they took a shortcut and ended up trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains during a brutal winter.
Yeah, that didn't go well.
No, it's a tragic illustration of the allure and danger of shortcuts. It's a reminder that the easiest path is often not the best path.
It's so tempting, though, right?
It is. It makes you think about those areas in life where we're tempted to cut corners to look for the quick fix, the easy solution.
Yeah, for sure.
What are some of those traps that we need to be aware of?
I think it applies to everything from our personal relationships to our careers to how we approach our finances.
Yeah.
The desire for instant gratification is so pervasive in our culture, but it often leads to long-term consequences.
It does. So Housel then kind of shifts his focus to this idea that no advantage is permanent.
Okay.
He starts by introducing Cope's rule, which observes this tendency for species to evolve larger bodies over time.
Oh, interesting.
And, it's interesting because while size can be an advantage in some ways, it can also make species more vulnerable.
Right. They become less adaptable.
Less able to cope with change. Makes me think of, those companies that were once giants but failed to adapt to changing times, like Sears.
Yes, Sears, Kodak, Blockbuster.
What can we learn from these cautionary tales?
I think the big lesson is that no matter how successful you are today, you can't rest on your laurels.
Right.
You have to be willing to adapt, to innovate, to stay ahead of the curve.
So how do we avoid becoming the Sears of our time?
Well, Housel doesn't offer a simple formula,
Right.
but he does encourage us to challenge this assumption that we've already discovered all the important things.
Okay.
He quotes Thomas Edison, who famously said, "The age of invention hasn't started yet."
It's amazing to think that back in 1908, when Edison said that, the world was on the brink of so many technological advancements,
Right, cars,
the
airplanes.
internet, and yet he believed the best was yet to come.
It speaks to the unpredictable nature of innovation.
Yeah.
What might seem mundane or insignificant today could become revolutionary tomorrow.
It's true. It makes you wonder, what are those next big things that we haven't even conceived of yet?
Yeah, and how can we cultivate a mindset that's open to those possibilities?
Right. And Housel then dives into a more personal theme,
Okay.
talking about this tendency for people to present this polished version of themselves and their accomplishments.
Oh yeah, the highlight reel.
My highlight reel, exactly. Think about social media. Everyone's curating their best moment.
Right.
It's easy to forget that everyone struggles. Everyone has setbacks.
Right, we compare our behind-the-scenes struggles to others' carefully crafted public image
Exactly.
and wonder what we're doing wrong.
Yeah, and Housel reminds us that success is rarely effortless.
Right,
There's always this story of hard work, dedication, and often a good dose of luck behind every achievement.
for sure.
It's a crucial reminder to be realistic about what success really looks like. It's not about perfection or avoiding failure. It's about embracing the journey with all its ups and downs.
I like that.
So how can we be more realistic about success, both for ourselves and for others?
Well, I think it starts with being more aware of the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we consume.
Yeah.
Are we focusing too much on the highlight reel, or are we acknowledging the full picture with both the triumphs and the challenges?
That's a great point.
Hmm.
So Housel then turns his attention to one of the most powerful forces that shapes human behavior,
Yeah.
incentives.
Right.
And he argues that incentives drive our actions and beliefs often more than we realize.
Yeah, that's true.
And sometimes those incentives can lead us to make choices that we know aren't in our best interest.
Yeah, for sure.
He uses the example of a pizza delivery guy who became a subprime mortgage banker during the housing boom.
Oh, yeah.
And he knew the market was unsustainable,
Right.
but he was making more money than he'd ever dreamed of.
Yeah, it's a classic example of how incentives can cloud our judgment and lead us to make decisions that we might later regret.
They do. So Housel also talks about the popularity of the drug lord El Chapo in his hometown. And, despite his criminal activities, he was seen as a hero by some because he provided for the community in ways that the government never did.
Yeah, it's a stark example of how incentives can shape perceptions and even justify harmful behavior.
It does. It makes you think about the incentives that are at play in our own lives.
Yeah.
Are we aware of them? Are they
Yes.
aligned with our values?
Those are great questions.
So Housel wraps up his exploration of human behavior with this powerful observation. Wounds heal, but scars last. He's saying that while events may pass, the experiences we have shape our worldview and our behavior in lasting ways.
Yeah, it's a concept that resonates deeply.
Ah.
Think about the lasting impact of events like World War II or the Great Depression on those who lived through them.
Right.
Even decades later, their experiences continue to shape their outlook and their choices.
It's a reminder that we are all products of our experiences, and those experiences, both positive and negative, become part of who we are.
It's true, they shape our beliefs, our values, and our decisions, sometimes in ways we don't even realize. And Housel asks this powerful question: how have your experiences shaped your perspective?
Yeah.
How can you use your past to inform your decisions in the present and future?
It's a question worth pondering. We're gonna wrap up our deep dive into Morgan Housel's Same as Ever after a quick break. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on quite a journey with Morgan Housel's Same as Ever, exploring these enduring patterns of history and human behavior. It's amazing how these insights resonate even in our rapidly changing world.
It's like Housel has given us this new lens to view the world through, helping us make sense of events and decisions in a way that feels both timeless and incredibly relevant to our lives today.
I'm struck by how many of these ideas are almost paradoxical in nature. We've talked about how stability can breed instability, how success can lead to complacency, and how our desire for shortcuts often leads us down the wrong path. It's a reminder that things aren't always what they seem on the surface.
Absolutely. One of the biggest takeaways for me is the importance of understanding our own psychology, those hidden biases that shape our choices even when we think we're being rational.
Right. We're not always these logical, calculated beings, are we? We make decisions based on emotion, fear, and sometimes even just plain old stubbornness.
Yeah, Housel really drives that point home.
He does, and he also reminds us of the power of stories. Think about how often we make decisions or form opinions based on narratives, even when those stories may not be entirely accurate or complete.
That's a good point. It's a reminder to be critical thinkers, to question the narratives we're presented with, and to seek out diverse perspectives before forming our own conclusions.
Couldn't agree more. And let's not forget the importance of patience, which Housel emphasizes throughout the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that meaningful change often happens gradually, not overnight.
Right, in a world obsessed with instant gratification, that's a tough lesson to embrace.
It is, but whether it's personal growth, building a business, or even just navigating the ups and downs of the stock market, patience is essential.
He also encourages us to get comfortable with uncertainty. You know, we can't predict the future, but we can develop a mindset that's adaptable and resilient, ready to adjust course when those inevitable surprises come along.
So much of what we've discussed today boils down to cultivating the right mindset. You know, it's about being aware of our biases, embracing the long view, and being prepared to navigate those unexpected twists and turns that life throws at us. What's resonating with you most from our deep dive into Same as Ever?
For me, it's that idea that while we might yearn for those simpler times, we shouldn't underestimate the progress we've made. We're living longer, healthier, and more prosperous lives in many ways than previous generations.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance between acknowledging the challenges we face and appreciating how far we've come.
Exactly.
It's also a reminder that the world is constantly evolving, and what might seem like an advantage today might become a liability tomorrow.
That's true. We can't afford to become complacent. We need to stay curious, keep learning, and constantly adapt to stay ahead of the curve.
And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from our deep dive today, the importance of embracing continuous learning and growth.
We can't just rest on what we already know. We need to be open to new ideas, new perspectives, and new ways of thinking if we want to thrive in this ever-changing world.
Housel ends his book with a thought-provoking question that I think perfectly encapsulates this idea he asks. Knowing that stability often breeds instability, how might we embrace manageable doses of instability in our own lives to become more resilient in the long run?
It's a powerful question to ponder. Maybe it's about stepping outside of our comfort zones, challenging our assumptions, and being willing to experiment and even fail occasionally.
Yeah, perhaps those moments of manageable instability are what ultimately help us grow, adapt, and build resilience. It's something we'll leave you to consider as we wrap up our deep dive today. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of Morgan Housel's Same as Ever. We hope you found it as insightful as we did.